Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You guys sound great.
Oh, good. Okay, good. Jim, how are you today?
Oh, okay.
Fancy seeing you here.
I see you have your advertisement shirt on. That's good. We don't have those things at EPA.
I had to buy it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, we have a really great employee association, National Association of Credit Specialists, and they have a big conference every year, and they had these on sale one year. I was like, I must have one.
It's nice.
Good morning.
All right.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started. So I think we have, it looks like, I think almost 40 people that have joined us online. So again, welcome to everybody that's joined us to the first ARWO conference being done remotely on this platform. So you'll see that you have a screen off to the right, and it has a chat option as well as the ability to raise your hand. So please use that to ask questions that you may be interested in getting answered from our two distinguished guests today. I'm going to start out with a brief introduction on both Andrew and Edna, and then we'll ask them to give us an overview, kind of an update on their agency, and that will allow them 10 to 15 minutes if needed. If it's shorter than that, that's fine as well. And then we're going to have some questions. And so we have some questions lined up, and then we may put you to the test on how well you do on your feet by questions from the attendees that you did not get to see beforehand. But we promise we'll be kind to you. So thank you for joining us today. I'll start out with Andrew Sawyers, is the Director of Office of Wastewater Management at the EPA in DC. He oversees the MPDES program and the Clean Waters Act mechanism permitting of municipal and industrial discharge into surface waters. As director, Andrew is also responsible for multiple technical financial assistance tools for maintenance and development of the wastewater infrastructure in this WIFIA and the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, and the EPA's Water Finance Center. Andrew previously worked for the Maryland Water Control Financing Administration, where he managed the clean water and drinking water estimates for the state of Maryland, and also the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Fund. So Andrew has several degrees, including a PhD from Johns Hopkins. So Andrew, welcome, and thanks for joining us. Edna Primrose has served as Assistant Administrator for the Water and Environmental Programs at USDA Rural Development since 2018. I retired in January 2018. So Edna came to the agency just a few short months after I left. But Edna leads the USDA Rural Development team in DC and is also responsible for the staff that's located in every state, and they use that famous water and environmental program to improve the quality of life in rural communities throughout this country. Edna previously served, prior to joining the water programs, as the Rural Development Chief Operating Officer, and she was in that role in 2012 until 2018 when she joined the water program. Edna has a lot of experience in working in the Department of Labor as well as their National Director for the Office of the Job Corps, and has been a true leader for the USDA Rural Development Program in the water sector. So Edna, thank you again. We're going to start the session by having Edna speak, and then Edna, when she concludes, we'll have Andrew step up with his agency update. Edna, I turn it over to you. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim, and welcome everybody. I know it's different having a virtual conference, but one of the things that I've heard through these conferences that I've been speaking in is that it has really enhanced people's ability to participate. Plus, they can go back later and watch the various sessions. So thank you so much for taking the time to join the conference today. And very much thank you to ARWO for inviting me. I'm glad to have USDA at the table, literally and virtually. So as Jim mentioned, I'm the Assistant Administrator for the Rural Utilities Services Water and Environmental Programs. Sometimes we're also called the Water and Waste Disposal Program. And for those of you who may not be familiar with what we do, we provide financing in water and waste infrastructure. We are able to cover drinking water, sewer, solid waste, so think about landfills, as well as stormwater. So when you put all of that together, you really have a pretty broad portfolio of services that we can provide through our financing, and we really like that. There are actually about 13 programs that come under water and environmental programs, whether it's a direct or regular loan and grant program. We have set-aside loan and grant programs, such as persistent poverty counties, for example. On the grant side, we have set-aside programs not only for persistent poverty counties, but also Native American tribes and colonias. We have a whole host of grants that are designed to help with technical assistance, our technical assistance and training grant program. And we feel like that's pretty important because, again, you all know that you're investing a lot in yourselves, your companies, and your communities when it comes to water, wastewater, and solid waste infrastructure. And so we want to make sure that not only is your loan affordable for you, but also for your ratepayers and users. And oftentimes we find that our technical assistance and training providers are an extension of ourselves and can provide that industry expertise that systems often need. Not only from the financial standpoint, but also from managing a system and working on workforce development issues and issues like COVID-19 that come up that you're not expecting. So we really take pride in that. Just to give you an example of our footprint in rural America, in fiscal year 20, we invested over $2 billion across the country, and we're really proud of that. I'm just going to be honest and say we weren't really sure of what COVID-19 would bring in terms of communities investing in themselves at a time like this. But we did have record low interest rates that spurred a lot of activity. So we're super excited about that. That $2 billion impacted over 2 million rural residents. So we're just delighted. When I think about the 10-year footprint of WEP, we have impacted over 25 million rural residents over that 10-year span and invested almost $20 billion in rural water and waste infrastructure. So soon you'll hear from my colleague, Andrew Sawyers, who is amazing. And we work very closely with EPA on a number of initiatives and MOUs. And even with what I'm talking about as far as $2 billion, it still isn't enough to meet the need. So we really rely on partners like you to help us leverage our funds well, help us make sure that we're reaching all the communities so that they can learn about the opportunities to take advantage of the infrastructure financing, and then of course focus on sustainability and resilience. One of the other things I wanted to mention is that it's nice to see, I think we have about 7,000 borrowers in our portfolio right now, a little over 15,000 loans. And it is nice to see our borrowers grow. So certainly with ARWO, you have a number of your members that have grown with USDA, and we're proud of you. We're proud to see you expand. We're proud to see you consolidate with other communities, with other systems to get that economy of scale and to improve services. We think it's great. We also, of course, meet rural systems where they are, where they may not be looking for a consolidation, and that's okay too. We try to be a one-stop shop for whoever needs us, and again, to meet people where they are. I think when I think of COVID-19, one of the benefits that we have is a number of financial options for borrowers. We did put something on our website, www.rd.usda.gov, about options, and we actually already had the authority to extend financial options, whether it's payment deferrals, re-amortizations at the current or lowest interest rate available. And we've had about maybe a dozen payment deferrals and maybe one re-amortization so far. I think one of the main challenges, it just has been making sure that the systems can remain operational. So through our technical assistance and training providers, they've been providing personnel sometimes, temporary personnel. And then, as I mentioned, we've extended payment deferrals and re-amortizations to about a dozen borrowers. I think in the beginning, we thought the pandemic would last a short period of time. But you know what? I'm actually really pleased to see that we don't have more payment deferral requests, because that tells me our underwriting works. So we really try to make sure that our rates are affordable. We build in a debt reserve when we do the underwriting. And of course, you all are responsible stewards. We are able to brag that we have a delinquency rate of less than 0.5% in our portfolio. So people are working with you, doing the right things, and you're being responsible stewards of your systems and your funding. So I think that's probably a good overview. The only other thing I would say is, of course, it's fiscal year 21 and we are open for business. We do have a continuing resolution until December 11th, so we don't have our full year appropriation, but we are allotted a great deal of money right now in our loan and grant programs, and that includes search grants. So if you're working with a community that's not quite sure of what they want to do, we can provide funding for feasibility studies and preliminary engineering studies and the like. We are really running full service, so everything you can imagine is available right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Edna, for that great overview of what's going on. Andrew, Mr. Sawyers, you are on deck.
All right. Well, thank you. You know, Edna typically say this, but it's indeed the case. It's always a tough act to follow her, because I think she does such an incredible job for USDA in the work that they do in addressing systems across the country, particularly in rural communities. And so, Edna, we really thank you for your service and just the incredible work that you continue to do. I'm going to give sort of a, you know, as Edna just did, give a quick overview, maybe a slightly deeper dive on a few key things here. You know, particularly in the COVID space, I want to talk a little bit about some of our COVID-related actions. And then I want to touch a little bit on infrastructure and just wrap up, I think, on just a few thoughts going forward. You know, for me, whenever I do have these conversations, I think it's almost like an obligation that I talk a little bit about what the future looks like, because I think it's so important for us to continue to think about those conversations, not just what we're doing and how we can improve what we're doing, but also a little bit about what's ahead and how we need to be prepared to do that. So I want to start by just touching a little bit on some of the COVID-19 actions. I'll be fairly quick here because I think we have shared many of the updates with you. We have a coronavirus website. It's up to date for the latest information from the agency. And I think for many of you who are, you know, water operators or CEOs and executives, or, you know, people who are generally interested in sort of the conversation here, I think you're very much aware of some of the critical issues that we faced earlier on, whether it's workforce related issues and healthy workers. There were supply chain concerns, and obviously significant financial impact on utilities and issues around permittee compliance. And you know, when you think about the workforce aspect of it, you know, we did some work in this space. I know the administrator sent letters to all 50 states, and particularly focused on trying to get you know, water workers be viewed as essential workers. And I think in many states did indeed happen. And I think in many ways, it really helped to address what I thought was perhaps, you know, when you look across the broader sector, I think what has happened in the water and wastewater space has just been, it's just, you know, it's just remarkable. You know, I have not heard of any systems going down or any systems having significant concerns. I think the broader collaboration across, all 50 states have really helped to show me, and I think to show the larger, United States, how resilient this sector is and meeting the demands of, so many people at home. And so I think kudos to the water sector, and obviously many of you who operate it. Thanks to you for your continued service. Issues around supply chain, I think, we worked very hard along with so many of you. Much of those issues have mostly subsided. In the financial space, I think that's where we saw a lot of questions. And within EPA, I think, as Edna just described, the drinking water and the clean water SRF state revolving loan fund programs, we provided a lot of technical assistance that we thought were useful to borrowers, providing flexibilities, workouts that were available to the extent a state and or a borrower had questions around, how to pay the bills. And so we worked very closely with many of the states to address that. We also developed this COVID-19 financial impact tool to help utilities have a better understanding of what the financial impacts are. And so it certainly can be used for different purposes, certainly now, but also in the future to the extent it's needed. And then we also work with the Tribal Infrastructure Task Force to make sure that we could identify some of the federal resources, the information and programs necessary to support those communities. In terms of some of the other financial work that has happened during COVID and, and frankly beyond, Edna talked a little bit about her program there. I will continue to talk about sort of the linchpin program, if you will, the benchmark Clean Water SRF program. We've provided about, $138 billion since inception, but this year, as with many years, fairly robust investments, about $7.5 billion worth of investment over this year. And you look over the last 3 years, we're somewhere north of about $3 billion. And much of that obviously is to municipalities and utilities across the United States. And I think part of it is just the continued work by so many of you understanding the importance of utilizing the Clean Water SRF to support so many different activities. And it's in terms of the broad eligibilities, I think that's particularly key. We're doing some work internally to continue to sort of expand the market reach of it. We're looking at ways to catalyze investments, make sure that we're funding all the eligibilities. And so we have a couple different marketing tools, one focusing primarily on decentralized systems and non-point source projects to assist state and potential borrowers. We're also looking at ways to incentivize investments in the reuse space. And I think we're preparing a document now that will look closely at sort of integrated water reuse in the Clean Water SRF program. We also have a new grant program. It's a zero overflow and stormwater reuse municipal grant program. We're working to get that stood up fairly quickly. The other program that I would like to highlight briefly it certainly helped to address some of the COVID-related items, but also just a general update for many of you is WIFIA. I think you all remember this was created in 2014. Received the first appropriation in 2017, and we selected our projects in 2017. And since the beginning of WIFIA, we have about 89 letters of interest. And I think with the low fixed interest rate, we see WIFIA being cheaper in many ways than some of the alternatives. And it has incredible flexibilities, if you will, customized repayment schedule, customized disbursements, no penalty for prepayment, flexible co-financing, no rate lock or commitment fees. And over the last month, just the flexibilities by themselves, and I think perhaps the attractiveness of the program, the incredible interest rate, sometimes a little bit over 1%, in perhaps one or two cases, south of 1%. And when I think about over the last month, the WIFIA team have closed 5 transactions where we've executed a 6, and the total amount of WIFIA projects funded since 2017, we have about 40 projects funded for about $7.7 billion. And when you think about the broader sort of leverage, if you will, because WIFIA supports 49%. And so you think about the investments that WIFIA has leveraged into the broader US infrastructure market, it's about $16.5 billion. And communities have saved something close to about $3.8 billion. This is just, I think, phenomenal success for a program that we started, we built from scratch a couple of years ago in terms of helping communities across the country to save significant amount of resources, generate a significant amount of jobs, and really leverage new infrastructure that was going to help us for a significant period going forward. We just closed our 2020 round. At this point, we're still assessing the information that we have gotten. We think we have about $5 billion available. Not think, we do have about $5 billion available for prospective borrowers, and about $1 billion for the state infrastructure financing authorities, the SWIFIA component. And so we have some really neat projects in the pipeline, which I think address some critical issues that I think many of you have demonstrated in terms of resiliency through water reuse, groundwater, aquifer replenishment, the concept of regionalization, which I'll touch on a little bit. Another COVID item, so that's it for WIFIA, which I think, again, just phenomenal accomplishment certainly by the agency, but also by the many customers who continue to use this. And we thank you and we appreciate your efforts, and we look forward to continue to work with you to expand the reach of WIFIA, the SRF, and our funded programs. I want to maybe offer something that I know we haven't talked much about, staying in sort of the COVID lane. We've been working closely with several federal partners on wastewater tracing and / surveillance. I think many of you have heard about this. We're collaborating, I think, on and breaking new ground. We're exploring how our sewage and our wastewater system can play a vital role in sort of the public health decision making that's frankly has sort of enveloped many of us now. And so my office, the agency, obviously, ORD, we're helping to coordinate the sewage surveillance framework and working with our federal partners. We're working with a lot of academic institutions and research partners to help with the national sewage surveillance effort. It's the National Wastewater Sewage Surveillance Effort was announced by HHS. We're partnering with CDC, USGS, and several other federal agencies, and we're researching COVID-19 occurrence and raw sewage, developing a national framework for conducting sewage surveillance to potentially identify, one, the presence and or absence of the disease in communities or more local settings. In many cases, there are some folks who are looking at campuses. They're looking at they're looking at the absence of the disease in communities. They're looking at ways to focus on trends and or threshold exceedances. We're also looking to potentially determine the prevalence in a community or a locale by using the testing results and converting some of those measurements into the number of cases. That's a little more difficult, but that work is continuing. And so the surveillance process for COVID, it's still in the early stages, and there are various approaches and technologies that we're currently looking at deploying, and we're actually evaluating. And so in the past, surveillance has been used in many other spaces, detecting illicit drugs. We're looking at certainly trying to figure out how best this can support our public health education. It has been surveillance has helped to address issues around polio, hepatitis, and for early detection of many of these public health concerns in communities. And most recently, it's now being applied in the SARS-CoV-2. And there are other countries, many countries that are utilizing this effort: Netherlands, South Africa, and Spain, and elsewhere. It's an infectious disease, as I think many of you know, and I think one of the things that we have found in many of the work that's currently happening, preliminary research indicate that monitoring the wastewater presence of SARS-CoV-2, we think it's an early indicator. We are seeing infections show up, at least 6 days, in some cases, on an average, maybe 3 or 4 days before the broader community infection is becoming more apparent. So this new surveillance system, we think, not only as a diagnostic system, but it will help as an early warning system to alert public health officials about infection or a lack thereof. And we think it's going to be useful in helping us to direct resources, whether it's individual testing to the communities that might need it. And, you've probably heard about some of the examples on the news in the University of Arizona back in August, I think in August 26, where the virus was seen in the wastewater. And immediately students were tested, and 2 asymptomatic students were identified through that clinical testing. Isolated, and in many ways, I think that helped to stop the spread in that case. So moving beyond surveillance, trying to cover as much as I can in a short amount of time, I want to talk a little bit about something that I know is close and dear to you all in terms of water systems regionalization. There's several sessions coming up, and so I won't focus a lot of attention here, but maybe 2 key things I want to touch on. One is this idea of, we put together this sort of compendium of what states are doing. I think we're going to continue to focus on that and probably revisit it and expand it to show what are some of the opportunities out there that I think are really useful and can help us as we think about deploying deploying regionalization or partnership concept. I think, again, we really need to figure out ways working together to solve some of these compliance issues, whether it's sharing the cost of operators or maintenance type activities. It's critical. We've been working to help some of these struggling systems. And I think whether it's promoting informal partnerships, there are so many different examples of how this can be done. And so the idea behind looking at incentives for partnerships, funding and financing, or outreach and communication, I think so many of this will be in the compendium. And I think it's called, many of you are aware of it, it's called a Water System Partnership. Again, it's a look at state programs and policies that support partnership activities. It highlights sort of a one-stop shop, if you will, for anyone to find information on some of these programs. There are about 35 states, based on some of the information we have in it, 35 states that prioritize consolidation in their drinking water SRF programs. You have other states such as Ohio that's going a bit further, offering principal loan forgiveness for systems that are focused on partnering. Kansas, I think, is a really good example of a state creating incentives by coordinating with the federal partners. Many of obviously Edna's shop, HUD CBDG is also involved in this effort, looking at ways to create sort of a very competitive system, make sure it's available to systems with populations that are low and moderate income, and providing some resources that would incentivize the consolidation there. California is also doing a lot of work in this space, and there's so many different creative approaches to that. So one key area in the compendium space, again, is to look at what states are doing and see how we can deploy to address broader regionalization questions. A second and key area for us is Congress directed us to look through the American Water Infrastructure Act, where we're looking at opportunities related to the safe harbor provisions. And EFAB had a really, I think, sort of a really good deep dive on some really interesting recommendations there. And so one key thing for us, obviously, look at ways to help provide some opportunities for utilities who are looking to take over others, or systems that are looking to take over others without having some of the obligations that typically would come with a takeover. So that's something that we're exploring, some of the opportunities. There's still a bit of work to be done there. But again, that's another key activity under the regionalization concept. And when you look at ARWO, Section 2010, there are several provisions in there, looking at the authority to require public systems to assess options for consolidation. We're looking also with my colleague, Jennifer, looking at the water system restructuring role and seeing how best, what are the sequence for systems and primary agencies to follow, and trying to look at ways to make sure that, we have the appropriate guidance out there. So key area there in terms of regionalization, the compendium, and obviously the ARWO recommendations. And there are so many different aspects to it. I think you're many of you are aware of that. I want to finish by talking a little bit about, and perhaps posing a question to you all. I think this is always important for us. I had an earlier talk this morning, Edna and I, in terms of just looking at future plans. And one of the key things, we were talking about decentralized systems. And one of the key things, perhaps a challenge that I shared with the group this morning, is that we really need to figure out ways to make sure that there's full access to communities and systems across the country. And we should figure out a way, maybe aspirationally, frankly, but that no community should have the issue of access where they're unable to have, whether it's full, sort of access to drinking water or wastewater systems. And I perhaps would share that aspirationally to you too. And I think so many of you have reached out to communities across your portfolio, across your jurisdiction, to make sure that the issue of access is addressed. And I will put that out as something that we should continue to strive for. And I think as we continue these discussions, we obviously want to hear a little bit from you, in terms of what else we can do to promote partnership, which is key for you. Obviously supporting the community-focused approaches and expanding some of the work we're doing, whether it's around integrated planning or technology transfer, technology deployment. But I would end with, something that I know is dear to many of you in terms of what I will call the resilient utility of the future. I think so much of the work that we're doing and a lot of the activities that both Edna and I discussed through both this morning and certainly the conversation here, we need to continue to think about what the utility of the future, frankly, looks like. And, whether it's around resource recovery, whether it's around resiliency, whether it's around regionalization, we have to make sure that we're building these utilities in such a way that to the extent we have issues like the pandemic that we are experiencing, that service continues to be available, that they have the wherewithal to bounce back quickly if there are any disruptions. And so I want to thank you all for the work that you have done, because obviously many of these systems are incredibly resilient, and in part the workforce aspect of it is critical because you have the right people working there. The financial capacity aspect of it is important. You have done the appropriate planning, meeting the environmental obligations, and so we have seen, we haven't seen the disruption in terms of water quality impairments. And so that is what I think about when I think about the utility of the future, and particularly when we think about the resiliency effort that's needed going forward. So, Jim, I would want to stop there, but again, I want to applaud the work of ARWO and your full board and the complement of team that you have assembled. And again, perhaps two challenge: one, make sure that we have the access issue addressed, and two, the idea of building this resilient utility of the future and making sure that some of the fundamental issues that enable us to, whether it's regionalization, integrated planning, or the financial aspect of it, that we're thinking collectively about how best to address those. So I'll stop there, but again, thanks to you all for the opportunity to share a few thoughts about the agency and some of the work that we're doing. Thank you, Jim.
Yep, thanks, Andrew. Hey, stay online because we're going to throw some questions at you first, and then we'll bring Ed here. A couple of the questions that came up, you've already covered. One of them talked about, some specific examples on how your sewage surveillance system is working. You mentioned the Arizona case. And I know specifically here in Colorado, at Colorado State up at Fort Collins, that they were one of the early testers as well, had positive tests coming out of one of the dormitories, and took action to kind of isolate what seemed to be, infection starting to come there. So I know the surveillance system is deployed and working, and it's going to be interesting to see, I guess, post-COVID, how that continues and is an advantage for the wastewater systems to be able to help in public health. The other issue that you already discussed as well is the EPA report on regionalization, and you talked about some of the recommendations coming out of there. There was also a question regarding that report where it talks about, it says that just over, and again, I'm not familiar enough with the report, but I'm assuming this is accurate. It says annual revenue for just over half of the 50,000 community water systems is only 25,000. And the biggest impediment to consolidation is, local control, both is strength, but is also a weakness. And the question is, can the agency be more proactive in attacking this 50,000 number and getting that down, to a much smaller number, which would, I think everybody agrees would be better for everybody involved.
Right. Yeah, no, so thank you for that question. It's a tricky one in many ways because you want to recognize, obviously, local decisions, right? And so we could put in place, I think, the apparatus, and we could put in place, the protocols and all the different policies about how to encourage and incentivize regionalization. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that we have a lot of different communities who have perhaps very different decisions. And so I think one of the things that we will continue to do, Jim, is to expand the reach of information we have available. And we will do, whether it's the webinars, and we will be very proactive in encouraging folks to do this. But in terms of a mandatory sort of a process where we're saying you must do this, I think when you look at some of the activities that we're seeing, we're asking communities to think about it, right? But ultimately, it's going to be their decision. So I think maybe the quick response to your question is we're going to be as proactive and active as we can in helping. But ultimately, you want to make sure the communities have a significant role in what the final decision is. And they should have all the facts available to them before making that decision.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Edna, we're going to bounce a couple questions to you. I think both of you already talked about the COVID, what's going on with your portfolio. And so that was one of the questions that I had, and you both seem to have addressed that already. We do have you mentioned the search grants, and so I've got a program-specific search grant question, but I'm not going to hold you to your response. If you think that it's something you want to research and get back to us on, then we can post that, up later to people as we send a summary of what the conference was later. But regarding the search grants, people know that those are for feasibility studies for small and low-income communities. And the question is, if we have where we're studying feasibility of regional projects, and some of those communities meet the criteria, but then there's others that don't. And I guess I'll share my thoughts based on agency is that the community share of those that are eligible could get search grants to help, and the community share that are not eligible could not. That's kind of my response, and I'll throw that to you for a reply, and then I have one more question for you too.
Yes, that is exactly right. Statutorily, we have requirements around who we can serve and the eligible communities for those funds. So exactly, which would be the same if it was, a regular project outside of search. Those communities that are eligible would be able to access those funds, and then the ones that aren't would have to find other means.
All right. So this question I'm going to go out, and then once Edna responds, and we'll throw it back to Andrew as well. But so, those of us that are outside the Beltway aren't a lot of times informed of what's going on inside the Beltway. So from your perspective as the head of your programs in your respective agencies, tell us a little secret about what's going on inside the Beltway in your program that the rest of us may not and might never figure out or find out what's going on. Edna, I'll throw it to you.
I don't know. We're so transparent here. Honestly, I think it's probably no secret that we're just like super committed, and regardless of what's going on inside the Beltway, we're focused on the mission. So people are hard at work. They're working with communities. All of that stuff is happening. Let's see. I guess the only thing I could think of is just really figuring out what money we need for the continuing resolution. So that's something that is not necessarily secret, but I'll just tell you the process. So several times a year, we take a look at what we call our backlog report, which is really our pending projects list across the country. And we work very closely with our field office representatives because, of course, the staff in the field are the ones that administer the WEP program, and they know their communities best. So we took a look at that based on the end of fiscal year 20. So we did 881 projects in fiscal year 20, and about 2/3 of them addressed a health or sanitation risk, which was great. So we know that the money's going to, to the right places. But we took a look at where we stand right now, or stood as of October 1st, and really help use that to help us gauge how much money to request based on the continuing resolution. So we get a bottom line dollar amount, but we can put the pots of money where we see pending projects. So that might be a secret.
Thank you, Edna.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any secrets, but I think I want to pick up where Edna started. And I think many of you know this, so it's absolutely not a secret, but I think during COVID, it really was, and it is, and it continues to be fairly pronounced to us. The men and women who work for this agency and the commitment that they have demonstrated is just frankly incredible. My shop, we have about 140 people who are either focusing on NPDES permits or infrastructure investments across the broader EPA. I think you understand, what our roles are in administering, particularly in the Office of Water, the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And I've said this repeatedly during this period of COVID. I've never been more impressed with our staff and our colleagues, the commitment shown, the commitment demonstrated, whether it's compliance questions, whether it's water quality questions, drinking water questions, they're on top of it. The hours that they have worked are just so, it's really amazing to see how folks have stepped up and delivered to make sure that, the American public has access to both safe drinking water as well as the water quality issues that they're wrestling with. So I would probably leave it at that point, Jim. It's just a real appreciation for the people who we call colleagues in this agency. They have frankly been brilliant during this period.
I would absolutely echo that. 100%. My staff are mostly virtual anyway, but our field offices are used to going in every day and having people come in and ask questions and interact and all of that. And they pivoted beautifully. And I too am very proud of the level of effort that our field offices put forth to help communities get the help they needed. So yeah, it's been a full court press, and development as a mission area between the Rural Housing Service, Rural Business Cooperative Service, and Rural Utility Service has offered a wealth of options and assistance during COVID-19, and we're really proud of that.
Thanks, Edna. We have a bunch of comments, and of course, a lot of people online have been involved in the industry for decades, and so there's folks throwing out comments, about past employees of both EPA and the water program, and I think everybody just saying, thanks to you guys for your ongoing work and support of the water and wastewater industry in this country, and know that our group and we work closely with a lot of the other peer groups as well, and we continue to work on putting stuff together that shows the need for additional funding, the need for technical assistance, the need for COVID relief, and everybody is pushing the concept that we need to work harder on the partnership side, work harder on making sure that all the are sustainable and resilient. And we appreciate your guys' help. Thanks for joining us today. You've done a great job. And I hope you have the opportunity, if you've got the agenda and you got your welcome packages, to join us if you see some other interest. I know, it's an unsettling period in DC. I went through administration changes when I was there. So, we know you guys are, going through that period. Some of you may be acting in some roles for a period of time, and at some point you'll have new political leadership, it appears, coming in. So keep your head up, keep your smiles big on your staff about the great job they're doing. And please continue with your very, very missions to helping this country. Thank you for joining us today. And we're going to close this session out. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for having
Thanks
us.
very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.